Good morning. I was looking at the faces here. It feels like a high school reunion to some extent, at least for some people. It also makes it a bit more difficult because I realize I need to create a new material. Some of the things you've seen here, maybe you've seen before. I'll try to be as entertaining and as inspirational as I can, given the topic. But today I thought I would focus on pay transparency. I mean, Jon is the right person to talk more about EU pay transparency directives and what is coming and so forth. But I think pay transparency is beyond just a directive, and this is what I would like to focus on today. Is one thing to be compliant, a different thing to do the right thing. So I'll go you through some of the research. I think it's exciting times in terms of the labor market and how the labor market will or may not, let's see, change in the future. And then share with you what we do in IKEA on our pay transparency journey. One disclaimer I usually always say is that you will see Inca down there. It's not a mistake. I do work for IKEA as well. Not to bother you too much with the corporate structure. Inca is the legal entity owning IKEA. And apart from IKEA Retail, which is probably what you know, we have other businesses which make things more exciting for us, and at least in the reward space. And I always do this, and apologies is part of I'm obliged. If you want to learn more about IKEA, there is a store half an hour down. Feel free to buy things. Hot dog, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, transparency. So, again, we were joking before. I've done this too many times, maybe lately. But the key question here is not why are we transparent? It's why are we not transparent, actually? Because nobody in their right minds will say transparency is a bad thing, at least when it comes to pay. And I think this is the key question to answer. What have we inherited, some of us, created some others, that doesn't allow us to be transparent? Or why are we not today transparent? Or at least as transparent as we would like to or we would need to be? And there's a number of things. The first thing, which is obvious, typical CFO kind of comment, if we are transparent about our pay levels, then we will increase the expectations of our co-workers or employees. They will expect to be always on the high side of the range and what have you. The costs will increase. Partly right, partly wrong. I will share some research about this. This is the typical CHRO comment. We will lose our talents because now people will just flow to different departments or different companies or whatever have you. Again, partly right, partly wrong. There is actually some research about it, and I'll try to share some of the learnings. And then finally, my favorite one of all, which is probably your entire management team, every single exception you have becomes visible. And this is the downside or the upside, it depends how you see it, of pay transparency. All your dirty laundry becomes visible for others to see. Now, before we talk about what we have done, and I'll be conscious of time, in IKEA, I would like to put some research in front because I think it is one of the most interesting topics to research about. Pay transparency, the effect of pay transparency to the labor market, to human behavior, is something which is not very well researched. I was very disappointed, I don't know how to say it, to not be able to find at least too many academic research on pay transparency, the impact of pay transparency to individuals and also to the labor market. Most of the papers I was able to locate was from the US. They primarily focus on sports or public sector. And they are valid to some extent, but both sports and public sector are not necessarily your typical labor market. But still, you can extrapolate what you think is relevant from those. So the most interesting part, before I start, and I don't need to explain maybe National Hockey League to this crowd here, but in case, there is this fantastic experiment that was done organically, I guess, back in the 90s, when one Canadian newspaper decided overnight to publish the salaries of all National Hockey League players. And again, just in case you don't know, NHL is the professional hockey league in the US and Canada. So overnight, it was called the Montreal Gazette, came out in 1990, and there was a full list of all salaries of all hockey players, even better, ranked from the top to the bottom. So imagine you are a professional hockey player, you wake up in the morning, you take the newspaper and you're like, oh, I can find myself in this list. And actually I can find myself in the ranking of this list. So not am I not only my own pay data is public, I know my colleagues' pay data, and I know everybody in the industry pay data. So it's a fascinating experiment. It's a very, how to say, limited in nature because it's sports, it's hockey, it's US. But nevertheless, it is interesting to see what happened afterwards. And there was a guy who was smart enough to say, this is worth researching on. So, conclusion number one. This guy who wrote the paper followed individual performance of players and teams from the day. Also, there are some historical references because in sports you do keep statistics, in hockey at least historically. So he could go historically and not going forward for 5 years. So one of the things that he pointed out was that players shift from defense to offense. I think this is a typical example of how you measure performance, essentially. At the time, in the 90s, a good hockey player was the ones who got highest points. And points in hockey is assists and goals. So what players thought was, if I need to increase my salary, I should get more points. That makes me look like a better player. So what did? They forgot, or they started neglecting their defensive skills or activities to try to score more, because that's how they would get higher in the ranks. So this might not be 100% transferable to business, more than the way you define good is what you get out of it, essentially. There was an asymmetric response by overpaid players. That's a very long sentence to say that those who found themselves highly paid did not change anything. Because why would they? They are well paid. I guess most of them confirmed that they are where they should because they are top players, right? We've seen them all. So they didn't have any change of behavior. For them, it was right, it was proper. There was nothing for them to change because they got what they deserved, apparently. Where the effect was larger was on teams with high budgets. And there is a little asterisk on that. And that was because the gaps were wider, actually. So if you were a defensive player in a rich team, Los Angeles, I don't know, your gap to your co-players was wider because the offensive players were paid a lot more than you. So there was a very big effect on those teams because, again, happiness maybe is a relative feeling. So when you compare yourself not only to the defensive players of other teams, but to your peers in the same team, you found the gap to be too wide. So there was a much bigger shock for them to see how much less they got paid compared to the players in the same team. And then the part that working in retail, I'm afraid the most, looking at some pharma companies here, is that in the following seasons, the teams that had the higher budgets consistently overperformed. I guess in a very big extrapolation of this, the way at least I would perceive it is talent flows. Salaries became visible, skills were transferable to some extent within that labor market of hockey players. So players moved where they could get more money. And it was not a negotiation of one-to-one, it was public information. They knew exactly what that team was paying to the other players. They knew what to ask. They knew how to negotiate in a different way. So talent flew to the teams who can afford. So again, in a labor market situation, will it be that everybody will go to pharma versus retail? I like the two extremes. Maybe, maybe not. I don't think so. But there is going to be some effect. And it will be interesting to see how big this effect would be. Not all skills are transferable in the business world. In hockey, it was. So, and then the other part that I think is very important to clarify when it comes to pay transparency is that what is to pay transparency? What does it mean, actually? There are different levels of pay transparency. And there is a number of papers here, and I promise I will not bother you too much with research, but I think it's interesting, where there was a best definition of what I could find of what transparent pay means. There is one level of pay transparency, which is the horizontal, which is knowing the level for which you work for. This is typically where the EU Pay Transparency Directive plays on, right? You should know where you're paid compared to your peers. There is a vertical transparency, which is knowing the whole structure of your company or maybe your labor market. And then there is the third one, which is across. You know everything about everyone. That's not common, to be honest. There are some companies that start doing more of their own vertical, which becomes also cross at some stage. But we are not at the stage, at least I don't know any sector where, except maybe public sector, where all of the companies in that sector have pay transparent, let's say, pay structure, so you can actually see fully what's going on. I think this might be one of the glorious futures at some stage, but it will take some time. So with that in mind, this is a beautiful thing. There is research about it, again, primarily coming from the public sector in the US, and especially this part, the horizontal one, is the one that is the most researched, to be honest. So what was the outcome of this? So what happens to individuals when they know how they are paid compared to their salary structure and potentially to their peers? The good news is that the pay gap goes down. So from a EU Pay Transparency Directive, if this is what they wanted to achieve, they will get it. It also benefits the bottom part. So the gap widens, gets smaller by doing this, essentially. You don't do this. The interesting thing, though, was that this is the most counterproductive way of doing this, because there is so much emotions and feelings, and it says here peer comparison was counterproductive. So you do risk to demotivate people who are finely paid, let's say, for what they do, just because you provide the feeling of relativity. And that's not always, it's very subjective, so it is a very sensitive topic. So only going horizontal, you get the benefits, but you also inherit this challenge of demotivating maybe a part of your population. On the other side, and this is also interesting as a finding, again, it is public sector US primarily. I think it was university professors, teachers, and stuff like that, right? So again, with a pinch of salt. But what was the longer term effect was that the average wage in the long term was actually lowered. And it's fascinating because you expect, back to the comment around our cost will skyrocket. Potentially in the beginning, there might be an adjustment, but then over time, what they have shown here is that actually it has gone down the average wage. And again, that's because you increase the bottom, but then you don't increase the top. And part of the it says here more compressed pay. That's exactly what happens, right? So your outliers tend to go closer because you do need to justify those outliers, and you don't want to end up in a situation to justify. So as a company or as a human being, as a manager, you tend to then start compressing the extremities and putting people closer to each other, with whatever this means for your other, let's say, philosophy in terms of pay. And then, of course, people are people. What they also found out was that there was a number of creative ways of trying to get around it. So trying to get other benefits in place or other ways of getting remunerated for their work, what is called here off-grid arrangements. So to make the long story short from this is that if you take EU pay transparency as an example of horizontal pay transparency approach, we will get the equal pay part or closer to the equal pay part, but in the long term, the average wage will actually go down. And companies will use that transparency, as they have done in the US, at least to say, I wish I could give you more, but I cannot, because this is now the policy. I cannot go more, because if I do this, I actually risk the whole equality between. There is the vertical pay transparency, and again, from a very American context, it might not apply to Europe or Scandinavia, but it's very interesting. So when the whole structure was made public, this is how the employees reacted. Surprisingly, there was increased motivation. I say surprisingly because to me it was counterintuitive. I didn't think, but there was. And the reason why there was increased motivation was because they could see the potential, most of these guys. So they could see that, okay, I'm getting here, but my manager is getting this much. And there seems to be a complete understatement of how we perceive our manager's salary. Apparently, at least in this paper, we tend to underestimate our manager's salary by 15 to 20%. So when you actually start seeing that, oh, I knew my manager was paying more, but I didn't know it was that much. That actually created some motivation to say, okay, then I can aspire for that because I have a better opportunity to increase my pay potential. And that also, again, if you look at it, every 10% rise in the perception of how much your manager is getting led to 1.5% more increased working hours. You can argue if working hours is productivity, but at least the discretionary effort was there. And then again, on the positive side, this seems to be a bit more balanced approach because it also opens up the possibilities. It doesn't give you only your reference to your peers. It gives you the whole landscape of what you can grow and develop. So it is a bit more constructive way, let's say, of moving towards pay transparency. Cross. This is the interesting part for me. This is the part where if I didn't have a day job, I would love to quit and do an analysis on exactly the effects of pay transparency in the labor market. So what happens when we have cross-industry sharing of pay data? What is called here very gently increased allocation of talent is exactly what I mentioned before. Those who could move to high-paying industries moved to high-paying industries. So again, from perspective of a retailer versus pharma or banking or so, will we see some moves of transferable skills? I would expect so. And back to the same point with manager to employee, I think our employees underestimated how much more pharma and banking pays. So when they see that, it will become a bigger, let's say, incentive for them to move. That being said, we also need to understand that the labor market is not completely unregulated. We have also unions, collective agreements playing a role in this. Not every skill is transferable. So maybe we can move as rewards professional between industries, but not everybody can do that. If you are a geophysicist in an oil company, I think your possibilities to move to a different sector might not be as many. So I don't think it will be dramatic, but there will be some flows in the market. There was a lot more competition on pay, and that is primarily driven by the transparency fact, of course, because people could actually ask more during their negotiations. And then, of course, there was more relevant applicants. There is a good paper from, I think it was Skoda, the automotive company, that they show the effects before and after posting salaries on their job ads. They got a lot less applicants, but a lot better applicants, which is what your talent acquisition guys want, actually. And then everything here, all of the papers, mentioned the role of line managers, being either the weak or the soft spot, if I put it like that. So whatever happened wouldn't happen if the line managers were well-equipped, felt comfortable, and competent to manage these discussions. So whatever you do, and I come back to that, never ever underestimate the role of line managers. Now, I've shown this slide too many times, but it is, I do believe it. What I want to say here is that you can choose yourself what you want to show and what you want to hide. There is no pay transparency, let's say, principle saying you need to get completely naked. You can do that if you want to, but most will not. And this is what we have chosen as well, right? So it's about choosing your start point. And you need to select for yourself as a company where you are and where you want to be. So we have made a number of choices at IKEA, where it's one of the few things where we thought we should not be the first ones out there. We have our own luggage to carry, and we need to make sure that this is cleaned up before we move forward. So we took a bit more moderate approach. I'll come back to that. We don't believe in a global standard, yet at least. We operate also outside the EU, so you can say there is some requirements coming with the EU Pay Transparency Directive. We think we will go beyond those anyway, but we don't want to go from a corporate and say this is one size fit all. We allow the local organizations to adjust within some limits, and I will tell you the limits later. And then we want to see this more as a commitment because we're doing the right thing, and less as a compliance. So yes, there are some compliance requirements we will of course comply to, but the value from us is not to just do it because there is a directive coming up or there is a law changer. It's because we think this is the right direction, essentially. So what we have chosen is that we have defined different levels of transparency depending on the audience. And I'll have a slide for that when we say there is the line manager, there is the co-worker, there is P&C, and there is rewards, essentially. So we have different levels of transparency depending on what job you do. We have trained, and we are still training line managers to what we call make paid decisions. This has been historically one of the weakest points in all of any survey you name it, that was underperforming, right? Engagement surveys, or pay recognition survey, anything was like, from the manager side, they did not feel that they have the right competence to talk about pay. And from the employee side, they didn't feel that their manager was able to talk about pay. So this is definitely the spot where, unfortunately, it takes the longest effort, but this is also the longest impact. To give you a sense of the size, we have 20,000 managers in IKEA. So it's 20,000 opportunities to do something wrong, but it's also 20,000 opportunities to do something right as well. So it depends how you see it. I have discussed with other companies whether you enable your managers to make paid decisions, because you could take another stand. You can take the stand of paid decisions are not for managers. If you want to solve things quickly, that's probably the quickest way. Do not allow them to make paid decisions. You do it centrally. Then you use your formulas and algorithms. You fix your gaps. Good. But then in the long term, this is not going to pay out, because you lose the engagement from the managers. They were not going to be able to explain. They will have the classic, I don't know, go to HR because they gave me your salary. And that's not the best way maybe forward. But again, you need to choose your stand on that. We have chosen to enable our managers to make paid decisions. And now we need to take the consequence of training 20,000 people in thinking in as similar a way as possible. We provide total reward statements to everyone today online. We spent a number of years implementing a platform, and then they could go to their web page and see a statement for what they're getting. If they understand it, we can discuss about it, but at least they can see what is on their pay slips and with some explanation on the basic things. And then finally, we have decided, which is probably one of the two things that helped us reduce pay gaps, by the way, is we are not asking candidates for their salary expectations, or sorry, the current salary, not salary expectations, their current salary during an interview process. That for me has been one of the two topics that has probably reduced pay gaps over time. And again, not because our managers are bad people who want to cheat women out of salary, is because they are typical managers who try to reduce budgets because they're pressed for costs. And if they can get you for 10, they will give you 11. But if they get for 12, they'll give you 13. So there is a bias in getting this information. Instead, we're now saying, don't think about what they're getting today. Think about how we want to pay for this job. This is your salary range. Place them where you think is the right placement. If you think they're new, put them in the bottom, but within the range. Don't try to pay less just because they get 20, 30% increase. If you select them to the job, this is the job they're going to pay for. By the way, the other thing that is mentioned is that, and it's not mentioned here, the other thing why we are, I think, as good in pay gaps or not having too many pay gaps is because we have worked for the last decade in having 50-50 men and women in leadership. That is, by definition, obviously, the data, I can see the data and they'd say, yes, yeah, of course, because statistically, if you have 50-50 sample, of course, your deviations will be smaller at the top level as well, right? So that's where you get, so we have a 50-50 split in leadership jobs, across the whole organization, actually. So that also means that when we do equal pay, at least the unadjusted pay gap, the top number, that is, of course, a good number for us. But anyway, pay transparency is not only about the number. It is about the behavior, is about the process as well. And this is now a bit old, I think it's 5 years old, from Gartner. But you can see that it is not only looking into what is your pay level, it is about what do we use as a company to decide your pay level. So what is your pay philosophy? What is the process that we define your pay? And how do you link it to performance? So if you don't have this story clear, it is very difficult to explain the decision you have made to the employees, right? So we took, again, the Gartner model with some adaptations, and we decided we will create a version of that. We want our employees to know the offer, total offer. That's why we also put the statement in front of them to know what we are offering as a company. We want to know where they're placed in the range and why. We want them to know how we make decisions. So what is the pay philosophy, what criteria we have used. And then, of course, on the same note, knowing the criteria in the pay philosophy, how can I affect my pay? If we get to that stage where these are clear, then we are good. This is what we believe. Then actually, you don't need to make any pay analysis. Things will fall in place organically because the right decisions are taken based on the right criteria. You don't need to, of course, you will do your tests, you will do your analysis, you will do your reportings, but then you will have a much more solid ground to base this. And this is what we say. It's about knowledge. We have the 4 groups that I mentioned before. Our community should be in the forefront. They should be the ones influencing, creating our total rewards philosophy. Our people and culture community, they should be aware to the point of explaining as well, because they are typically the first line of defense to management, to the business. we're struggling here. I guess you can imagine not everybody who is a business partner has a intuitive interest in the rewards, to put it mildly, but we are trying. And the other part of moving around that is also to go directly to people leaders. And they should be able to manage the discussions we have just described. Why you're paying your person there, what are the criteria we use, how is this aligned to the philosophy of this company, and what can you do as an employee to influence that. And then, of course, we want our employees to know, because if they don't know, then that's a bigger problem to begin with. It's also about preparing, as I say here as well. So we have created this approach now 2.5 years ago. We did a gap analysis to know where we have our blind spots, and we do have blind spots, as you can imagine. We have launched this global learning solution with training leaders to make paid decisions, and then we are obviously preparing to comply, not only in the European Union, by the way. There are other jurisdictions where you need to comply, but generally speaking, compliance for us is not a question, it's kind of the bare minimum. We want to take the next level here, right? And this is the part where I'm very proud of, I guess. Yes, why not? We made 4 modules, 5 minutes each. We want our leaders to take it. Then typically where we see the most value out of this is where, and that's locally decided, where they have working sessions outside. So they take those 4 modules on their own time or whatever when they have 5 minutes because they're really small. Then they have work groups. And this is where things happen, because then you talk about your own experience as a leader, a real case versus your real case, you calibrate, and this is where the things. So the first module is around our philosophy, the second module is around our variable pay programs, the third module is around our benefits, and the fourth module is around communication, how to manage a difficult discussion, actually how to manage a discussion to begin with, and then how to manage a difficult discussion, because as you know, remuneration can be very emotional at some times. So, what is the conclusion? And this is the part where you will all smile because, is this it? We all knew that before. But sometimes basic things are the right things to do, right? And I don't know how many of you were in the other room earlier today, but getting the basics in place, that's that's a starting point, right? No data, no structures, no job architectures. You will paddle in the water, you won't move anywhere. I mean, if you don't have something to base your analysis on, you will go in circles around the same place. Decide on your standpoints. I hope I gave you a good understanding of where we stand or what we have made as a choice. It doesn't mean that these are the right choices for you. You need to decide where you are as a company, what is your philosophy, what is your appetite. I've talked to other companies where they have a completely different perspective, not to say they're wrong, and they say, we don't want to be transparent. We like it the way it is. Fine. I mean, that's okay. That's the way that this company feels, and that's the way, typically, to be fair though, it's very much CEO driven. So sometimes, a new CEO changes, there might be. So I always remember my grandma used to say, it's never wrong to do the right thing. Do it, and then you will use it later. And this is the last part as well, train the leaders. You saw what we have done. It doesn't mean that this is the best way. It is a way. We have 20,000, so we need to scale it up in a way which is not taking too much time. Yeah, I mean, even if you multiply 20,000 by 20 minutes, you get the investment just by taking these courses, right? And then on top of that, if you do an hour session, that's 20,000 working hours. Not planning, not including not including preparations and things like that. So it's a huge investment. So you need to decide based on your scale, your appetite, as I said before, how much you want to invest and how quickly you want to invest. What is, I think, beautiful in this whole concept, and this is my last slide, is that you might not even have a choice, because pay transparency is coming to a certain way, in a certain way, let's say, and if, it's my own opinion now, if you don't do many of the things I just said, you will end up with some sort of a trouble later on, because someone else will do it out there, and then your employees will actually point and say, how come these guys are able to do it and we are not able to do it? Why? What are we hiding? So I think there is a good peer pressure effect from all of these directives and EU approaches, but it's not solving your problems, I put it like that. It just maybe gives you a more appetite to move faster. Thank you very much.